Hello, everyone, and happy Sabbath. Today, I picked a really good day for this. We're going to look at the identity of the golden calf. So back in the Exodus, when Israel was leaving from Egypt, they had set up a golden calf as Moses was on top of Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. Today, we're going to explain very clearly what that golden calf is and how that golden calf relates to Christmas.
Ezekiel 33:3.
The Bible did not actually call it a golden calf, and I put a question mark there. You're kind of combining two verses together to figure that out, but I'm going to break it down very piece by piece to show you like what it was and then where we got the golden calf idea from. Exodus 32:8. How quickly they have turned aside from the way that I commanded them. They have made for themselves a molten calf and bowed down to it. They have sacrificed to it and said, "These, O Israel, are your gods, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Now notice this. The first thing you can point out is that you have a single object, which is a molten calf. But notice, even when it talks about the molten calf, it says, Israel, these are your gods, plural. So you have a single object, but plural in regards to gods. If we take a look at Exodus 32:8, and we look at the Hebrew, we'll see that we have two words here. So calf and then molded or molten. So it's egel and maska. Sounds a lot like the word mask. 5695, egel, a calf. This is actually the first place that this calf word appears anywhere in the Bible. When Israel was at the bottom of Mount Sinai while Moses was up there getting the 10 Commandments, this is the first place in the Bible the word calf is used. The second word is 4541, mask or maska. Maska, definition, a libation, molten or metal image. Word origin, Nasic. So this word mask, it actually has an origin behind it. Let's figure out what the origin of the word is. Nasic, 5258. Nasic means to pour out. So of course, since we're dealing with an idol, we're dealing with a metal image that they had made themselves, they had to create it. So they had to melt metal down and then pour it out in order to create this idol. This is science or sciencing. How hot is a bonfire? So sciencing.com. A bonfire on the beach or at a campsite provides a cozy centerpiece and a source for roasting marshmallows. It's also an incredibly hot centerpiece that can quickly get out of control if not handled properly. A bonfire should be treated with respect as it can reach temperatures as hot as 1,100 degrees Celsius or 2,012 degrees Fahrenheit. That is hot enough to easily melt aluminum. This is again, sciencing.com. How hot is a bonfire? This is goldtraders.co.uk. Common gold questions. And the question is, what is the boiling point of gold? Now, I'm not interested in when gold boils, but specifically when it's melted. And it actually gives you both numbers on this website. Pure gold in its original form is in nugget or grain consistency. It can't be used for much in those shapes. In order to get gold into shapes needed, it must be melted with special equipment must be used. The gold itself is melted and boiled in containers called crucibles. And the materials that are used for crucibles and molds or casts must be able to withstand the temperatures that are necessary to melt and boil gold. The temperature required to melt gold is 1,948 degrees Fahrenheit. So the melting point of gold is 1,064 degrees Celsius, and a bonfire can reach as high as 1,100 degrees Celsius. So first off, could they have actually melted the metal in a bonfire? Absolutely. It's pretty close, but absolutely. If they got that fire hot enough to its extremes, they could definitely melt it. Now, keep in mind, when you're dealing with melting gold, especially when you're dealing with like chunks of gold, like nuggets, it's a little bit different than what we see in the Bible. They were taking jewelry that was already made, earrings. So earrings probably wouldn't need to reach as high of a temperature just because the gold wouldn't be in a nugget. It'd probably be a little bit smaller. And that's my assumption. The metal would be melted in a crucible. So here's an example. This is with iron workers, and iron workers are actually melting iron. And then the molten metal is poured. And so when we look at the word molten in the Bible, that's maska or mask. And then the word poured, nasak. And nasak is where we're getting this idea of making this molten image that was made out of gold that was melted and poured. Why was it called the golden calf? We saw it was called the molten calf. It wasn't called the golden calf. Why does everyone associate the golden calf as the golden calf when it specifically says it was a molten calf or a masked nasak? Exodus 32, 2 and 4. So Aaron told them, take off the gold earrings that are on your wives and sons and daughters and bring them to me. Then all the people took off their gold earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took the gold from their hands, and with an engraving tool, he fashioned it into a molten calf. And they said, these, O Israel, are your gods. Again, it's plural. Who brought you out of the land of Egypt? So this is interesting. We can see here that the jewelry was taken off of the Israelites. It was given to Aaron, who became the high priest. And then he took the jewelry, melted it down, and made it into this calf image. Here's a question. What was the problem with the golden calf? So now we know why it was gold. It was a molten calf, but it was a molten calf made out of gold earrings. But what was the issue with it? Why did God have a problem with the golden calf? Exodus 24 and 18. Moses entered the cloud as he went up on the mountain, and he remained on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. So this is when he was going to get the 10 commandments. That started in Exodus 20. Exodus 31 and 18. When the Lord had finished speaking with Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone, inscribed by the finger of God. So these 2 tablets of stone contain the 10 commandments. These were written by God himself with his finger. Moses did not write this down. Moses received the law written by the finger of God on Mount Sinai. So he was up there for 40 days and 40 nights receiving the law on 2 tablets of stone written down with the finger of God. Exodus 32 and 1. Now when the people saw that Moses was delayed in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this Moses who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what happened to him. So remember, he's been up there for 40 days and 40 nights, and the people gave up on Moses because, like, he's not coming back. Exodus 32, actually 7 to 10. Then the Lord said to Moses, go down at once, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. How quickly they have turned aside from the way I have commanded them. They have made for themselves a molten calf and have bowed down to it. They have sacrificed to it and said, these, O Israel, are your gods, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. The Lord also said to Moses, I have seen this people, and they are indeed a stiff-necked people. Remember that word stiff-necked. Now leave me alone, so that my anger may burn against them and consume them. Then I will make you into a great nation. So God knew that the people were down at the base of the mountain. And what were they doing? Creating a totally different God. They were making an idol. So as Moses is receiving the 10 commandments, the people are already breaking what they haven't even seen yet. So the question is, why was God so angry? We've kind of hit on it already. Let's look what happened prior to this point so we can figure out what exactly just happened that made this so awful. Israel was just led by God from Egypt. This was the Exodus out of Egypt. Exodus 1, 8 to 11. Then a new king who did not know Joseph came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become too numerous and too powerful for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase even more. And if a war breaks out, they may join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So the Egyptians appointed taskmasters over the Israelites to oppress them with forced labor. As a result, they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But we've also discussed there was a third city, the city of On. So in Exodus 1, we can see that Jacob's family, the Israelites, because Jacob was renamed Israel, they were eventually made slaves in Egypt as there was a new king that wasn't familiar with them anymore. And they were made to build these 3 Egyptian cities. That's a lot of work. Here are the cities. The 2 listed in the Masoretic text are Ramses and Pithom. And if you look up Ramses, like Pharaoh Ramses or Rameses, this first part of the word Ra, that's actually coming from the Egyptian god Ra. And this city Heliopolis, also known as the city of On, it's called the Pillar City, and their chief deity was also Ra. And there was also the worship of Ra in Pithom. So all 3 cities that the Israelites had built were associated to the Egyptian god Ra. There were other gods, but Ra was the chief. This is really important because if you want to figure out who the golden calf is, you need to know this. Moses did as God told him and demanded his people be released from the Pharaoh of Egypt to worship God. Now, I highlighted the words released to worship God. Keep this in mind. The whole reason that they were leaving Egypt was so they could leave, go into the wilderness, and then worship their God. Are you starting to see why God was so irritated with them when they built this golden calf? The Egyptians then saw the first plague, blood in the river Nile. This was the Lord God proving himself. This was the Father proving himself to the Israelites and to the Egyptians to show that he, in fact, was God and that these other gods that they worshipped were really nothing at all. The second plague was an infestation of frogs. The third plague was a swarm of gnats. And at this point, this is when the magicians in Egypt, they said this must be the work of the finger of God. And it's interesting they said the finger because the 10 commandments were written with the finger. So here we have the Egyptian priests or the Egyptian magicians, they tap out. They're like, this is beyond us. We can't replicate this. The fourth plague, masses of flies or just insects in general. We don't know exactly what they were. The fifth plague, death of all livestock. The sixth plague, disease and boils. And my belief is that Pharaoh Thutmose III was likely the Pharaoh that was the Pharaoh at the time of the Exodus, because his wife and he were excavated and they found that, yes, they in fact had boils. The seventh plague, storm and giant hail. The eighth plague, a plague of locusts. The ninth plague, darkness across the land. And the 10th and final plague was the death of the firstborn sons. So they did all of this and they saw all these miracles of God. Even the Egyptians threw their hands up and said, yes, this must be God. And then the Israelites go into the wilderness only to go on to worship this golden calf. So clearly their inspiration for worshiping this golden calf must have came from Egypt. All God wanted was our obedience. And he was willing to start over all over again with just Moses. Because when we read this conversation he had with Moses, he decided he was just going to deal with Moses, start all over again, and then forget this disobedient people. Because keep in mind, they just saw 10 miracles of God. Miracles that the Egyptian priests couldn't recreate, at least not all of them. 7 of them, they had no idea how to do this. Exodus 32, 11 to 13. But Moses sought the favor of God, sought the favor of the Lord his God, saying, O Lord, why did your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, with great power and a mighty hand? I want to point something out because I learned this recently, and I'm going to do a study on this later, but I just want you to know, when you see this uppercase Lord in the Bible, which in Hebrew is Yod, He, Vav, He, that's the Hebrew letters, it's 4 consonants. These 4 consonants, this is God the Father. This is something I did not know. So here you're seeing, but Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. This is the Father. O Lord, why does your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians declare, he brought them out with evil intent, to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger and relent from doing your people, or from doing harm to your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, and that's Jacob, obviously, to whom you swore by your very self, when you declared, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all the land I have promised, and it shall be their inheritance forever. So something important to point out here. When the Lord God appeared, he appeared as El Shaddai. He appeared as El Shaddai to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So here's something interesting. Moses is reminding God, you said that your descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky. Would God technically be breaking his promise or his word if he was to kill Israel and start over again with Moses? No, because of course he could make the descendants of Israel as numerous as the stars in the sky through Moses. But he still relented, and he still decided, because Moses, being someone who was very favored in God's eyes at this time, he listened to what he was asking him. Exodus 32, 14 and 15. So the Lord relented from the calamity he had threatened to bring on his people. And remember, he could have done it. There would have been nothing wrong with doing it, because Moses would have still fulfilled what he said. Then Moses turned and went down the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand. So the 2 tablets of testimony, that's the 10 commandments. They were inscribed on both sides, front and back. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, engraved on the tablets. So here we see once again confirmation. Moses didn't take out a chisel and write this down. The finger of God wrote out what was on the 10 commandments on these 2 tablets of stone on the front and the back. So clearly this was something very personal and something very important to God, because he chose to write it himself. He could have just dictated and had Moses write this down, but he chose to do this himself. So these 2 tablets of stone and what was on them was extremely important to him. When Moses came down the mountain and saw this, if you take a look at this imagery here, you can see the people are just kind of bouncing around in the revelry. They're drunk. I mean, some of the women are half clothed, and they're just dancing around this idol. It's complete degeneracy. So Moses came down with these 2 tablets that God had just written onto, and he smashed them on the ground. So what does this calf really represent? It's clear as day. This calf represents lawlessness. When you look at the symbol of the golden calf, this golden calf represents lawlessness, the people trying to do it another way. Exodus 21 and 6. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Did it say, I am the golden calf, your God? So what they did was they swapped the Lord God with this golden calf and said that this golden calf brought us out of Egypt. But remember, it was plural. So this golden calf was associated to not just one deity, but several deities. And the Egyptians were polytheists. This is Exodus 20, where Moses is receiving the 10 commandments. It starts off with, you shall have no other gods before me. The very first commandment is against this golden calf, or any other god for that matter. Now we get the next commandment. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything, in the heavens above, on the earth below, or in the waters beneath. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on their children to the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me, but showing loving devotion to 1,000 generations of those who love me, and here's the important part, keep my commandments. So as he's giving them the 10 commandments, he's telling them, those who love me will keep them. And we see this in the New Testament. The calf worship was the breaking of two commandments, the first two that we just read. We've got first, have no other gods before me, and we had several, because we had the calf, and the calf was associated to a multitude of gods. And then we had the second commandment, which was not even allowing this calf to exist. No idols. Nothing in the sky, nothing in the ground, nothing in the sea. No idols. There was something else that happened, though. Aaron, the high priest, Aaron and his sons were the Levites. Book of Leviticus, that's where Leviticus comes from, Levites. It means, and he called, Vayikra. The high priest also gave false testimony. So for the individual that's supposed to be the most pure, the most cleansed of the entire tribe, he gave false testimony during this period of the golden calf, or the situation involving this golden calf. Exodus 32, 21 to 24. What did this people do to you? Moses asked Aaron, that you have led them into so great a sin. So Moses is speaking to the high priest, or soon to be high priest, and saying, why would you lead these people into such a great sin? You should know better. Don't be enraged, my Lord, Aaron replied. Now notice my Lord is in lowercase. This is not referring to God, this is referring to Moses. Do not be enraged, my Lord, Aaron replied. You yourself know that the people are intent on evil. They told me, make us gods, again, plural, who will go before us. As for this Moses who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him. So far we haven't heard a lie. This is exactly what happened. But then look at verse 24. So I said to them, and this is Aaron, whoever has gold, let him take it off. And they gave it to me. And when I threw it into the fire, out came this calf. Now here's the lie. Did Aaron actually just take their gold earrings, throw it into a fire, and out magically popped a calf? That's not what happened. Let's look at Exodus 32, 3 and 4, just a little bit up. Then all the people took off their gold earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took the gold from their hands, and with an engraving tool, he fashioned it into a molten calf. So did it just jump into the fire, the earrings, and then pop out a golden calf? No. Aaron took an engraving tool and he molded it into this calf. And they said, these, O Israel, are your gods who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So we've got three sins here. Sin number one, have no other gods before me. That was gone. Sin number two, don't make an idol of above, below, or what's in the seas. That was broken. And now we have the high priest committing false testimony. He lied. So while Moses was receiving the law, Israel was breaking it. And keep in mind, they had just seen all these miracles that their Lord had brought them out of Egypt. And then they just turned their attention towards something they made with their hands and associated this to what brought them out of Egypt. And they said it was plural. The most important thing we can do for God is give him our obedience. It's not about your works. It's not about donations to the poor. You can come up with all kinds of different ideas as to how you want to serve God. But if you really want to serve God, understand the thing that he wants is your obedience. So you can do everything under the sun. If you're disobedient, you're wasting your time. The problem today is the same as the past. The people are stubborn. Their hearts are stubborn to the truth. Lots of people know that Christmas, for example, is not a holy day that's in the Bible. They know it has pagan origins. They know that December the 25th likely wasn't the date that Jesus was born. But their hearts are stubborn to the truth. They believe that they can worship God, but also be involved in festivities and worship that the pagans, the heathens were into. And the answer is they can't. We've seen this with Solomon. Solomon was still worshiping the Lord God when he had these idols and these sacrifices to Baal and Asherah. You can't do both. It's one or the other. Acts 7:51. Remember the word stiff-necked. Look what it says here. You stiff-necked and uncircumcised in the heart, and ears always resist the Holy Spirit, as your fathers did, also do you. So we're looking here in the book of Acts, but we're pointing all the way back to Exodus. So what's the problem here? The stiff-necked people, they're stubborn. And what's making them stubborn? Uncircumcised in their heart, their feelings. They're stubborn because of their feelings. They can hear quite well, their ears are working, but they're resisting what they're hearing. And they're resisting the word of God and the Holy Spirit that's coming from the people speaking to them, just as their fathers did. So look at Exodus 32:9. The Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and they are indeed a stiff-necked people. But why were they stiff-necked? We understand the reason in Acts 7:51. You stiff-necked and uncircumcised in the heart. Their emotions are what allow them or disallow them to serve God. Their emotions are making them go in a totally different direction. You're either obedient or you're not obedient. And if you're not obedient, there must be a reason for it. And the reason in this case was their hearts were not turned to God. They could hear perfectly well. They could see that what they were doing was wrong, at least by the 10 commandments, but they still did it anyway. Their hearts were not yet turned to God. Exodus 33:5. For the Lord had said to Moses, tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. If I should go with you for a single moment, I would destroy you. Now take off your jewelry, and I'll decide what to do with you. Now notice this. When God says that they're stubborn, right? Their hearts aren't circumcised. What does he say? If I was to go along with you, I would destroy you. Do you think that your stubbornness to God, do you think that your emotional temper tantrums or emotional excuses are going to be enough to explain to your Father in heaven? Absolutely not. He doesn't have patience for that. It's either obedience or not, and don't use emotions. When the law is written on our hearts through our faith in Christ and what he did for us, that's when our hearts become circumcised. That's when we are actually able to obey God. That's when we're able to keep the law. If you speak to a Christian that isn't even trying to keep the law because they come up with this complicated explanation of the law's been done away with, we're not under the law, etc., because they refuse to read the Bible correctly. They refuse to look at Galatians 5 and understand what it means to walk in the Spirit. If you're dealing with one of those Christians, understand, for one, they're not walking in the Spirit. The Spirit will not contradict the 10 commandments. And secondly, you know for a fact, the law is definitely not written on their heart. The stubbornness of the heart starts to disappear when we become obedient to God. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow conversion for most of us because we make mistakes, but that's what the blood of Christ is there for. God's not expecting perfection, but God wants to rid you of your stubbornness. Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? You see, God tells you that your heart lies to you, but the world tells you, follow your heart. You can't be wrong if you follow your heart. It's not true. Matthew 13:15. For this people's heart has grown callous. Your heart's hard. Who else's heart was hard in the Bible? Wasn't the Pharaoh in Egypt? Didn't his heart become hardened? So are we any different then? With our disobedience, we do have a hardened heart. How did it work out for the Pharaoh? Not too well. His whole kingdom was destroyed, and his heart hardened to the point that he chased Israel and was washed away. He died. So a hardened heart will eventually lead you to where? To hell. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn, and I would heal them. So what's wrong with these people? If someone needs to be healed, it means that they're sick. So what's going on? What do you mean they're sick? They're sick in the head. They're not thinking clearly. Like a child, they're letting their emotions guide them. The difference between an adult and a child is quite simple. A child leads by their heart. They lead by their emotions. If a child wants to do something, it does it. Do you know what else does that? An animal, a beast. If a dog or a cat or whatever wants to do something, it's going to do it. It's not going to think with their spirit because it doesn't really have the same Spirit of God that you do. It doesn't have the Holy Spirit. It has a spirit, but it doesn't have the Spirit of God in the way that you do. The cats and dogs are not made in God's image. You are. But you see, the problem is when we let our emotions guide us, we're acting like a child. And you're going to find that this golden calf, it wasn't a golden bull, it wasn't a golden ox, it was a golden calf. It's a child. Otherwise, they might not see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. These people are sick, and they won't repent. They won't turn. Repent doesn't mean you go to the church if you're a Catholic, and you go there when it's time for confession, and you go towards a man that calls himself the Father, even though the Gospels tell you, call no man on earth the Father. You can't ask a man to forgive you of your sins, only God. But God forgives you of your sins when you repent. And repenting means to change your mind. Stop being stubborn. If your eyes see and your ears hear and you know what the truth is, stop being stubborn, and then God will heal you. Why did they leave Egypt and make the golden calf? We're chiseling away trying to figure out more and more and more what this golden calf is. We know where it came from. It must have came from Egypt. Must have had something to do with the Egyptian god Ra, because the 3 cities that the Israelites built, Ra was worshipped in those cities, but also other gods. And we saw that when they were worshiping the golden calf, it used the word gods, plural. So they were worshiping multiple gods. So the golden calf represented more than just one thing. Acts 7:39 to 43. But our fathers refused to obey him. Remember, this is all about obedience. You're either obedient or you're not. You're either of God or you're of Satan. And your obedience is how you highlight which is which. Instead, they rejected him and in their hearts turned back to Egypt. They said to Aaron, make us gods who will go before us. As for this Moses who led us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him. So here we are in the New Testament. We're not in the Old Testament anymore. We went through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which is the gospel, and the book of Acts is the next book. But the book of Acts is talking about what? It's talking about what we just read about in the book of Exodus, associated to the golden calf in Exodus 32. At that time, they made a calf and offered a sacrifice to the idol. We know the idols can't eat, but they did it anyway. Rejoicing in the works of their hands. Remember, Aaron made it. He said he threw it in the fire and it just popped out, the earrings. But he actually chiseled it. He made it. It was formed with hands. But God turned away from them and gave them over to the worship, here it is, of the host of heaven. Now we're getting somewhere. Remember, they said that it was gods, plural. They made gods that got them out of Egypt, when it was the Lord God, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, El Shaddai. But here we see, no, they were given over to the worship of the host of heaven. What is the host of heaven? It says, as it is written in the book of the prophets, did you bring me sacrifices and offerings for 40 years in the wilderness, O house of Israel? No, they must have been giving offerings to what? The host of heaven. So this golden calf is associated to the host of heaven. If we take a look at this word host, we can see here in Luke 2:13, of the heavenly host praising. What is the heavenly host? Stratia. Now we're looking at the Greek here, but it's the same when you look at the Old Testament, New Testament, when we talk about the host of angels or the heavenly host. It says army, a host of angels, the hosts of heaven. Here it is. Look very carefully. Example, the stars. The people weren't worshiping God, they were worshiping the stars. This is very important because later in Deuteronomy, God gives them this commandment not to worship the sun, the moon, and the stars. And later in Deuteronomy, we find the people were in fact worshiping the sun, the moon, and the stars. And we can see they were doing this in the wilderness. And we see in the book of Acts, it confirms they were doing this in the wilderness. And they were in the wilderness when they were at the bottom of Mount Sinai. So they were worshiping angels. Now, how did that come to be? Remember when we look in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 32, we look at Deuteronomy 32, and it's actually talking about Genesis 11. In Genesis 11, the nations, the people of the surrounding nations that did not know God, they were not Israel, they were not Jacob's children. They were given over to the angels. What they did was they built this tower called the Tower of Babel. And then after this rebellion, their languages were split. Their languages were split into 70. There were 70 angels that did it. And you can actually find this out, which I learned recently. The Genesis 10, tablet of or I'm trying to remember what this is called, the tablet of nations, or in Genesis 10, it describes the nations. The nations are broken down by name. And with all the nations, if we add the names together, all the names that are listed in Genesis 10, the number is 70. So before Babylon, which is Genesis 10, there were 70 nations. Then came Babylon, and the people were split by 70 angels. So they were once again split into their 70. So what happened was, at this point, God said, well, if you don't want me as a God or you want to rebel, I will keep Israel. I will keep Jacob and his descendants. They will be my allotted inheritance. However, you, rebellious ones, I will give you over to the sons of God. I'll give you over to the angels. And here we can see when Israel is leaving Egypt, what are they following? Well, they're following the God of the Gentiles, which are angels, which are stars. If you look at 4756 at the bottom there, cognate, it says, to fight as a soldier, properly an army, or any organized host. Example of angels or constellations. Now we know constellations have to do with groups of stars. So it looks like when we look at angels in the Bible, or at least some types of angels, we do have the heavenly host being referred to as stars in the sky. Somehow the people thought that by worshiping stars in the sky, they'd be able to get ahead, I guess, in whatever they were doing. Be blessed. In the New Testament, we have this word planetas, 4107. Look at the spelling, Planetes. This is a Greek word. It shows up once in the Bible. Did you know that the word planet in English comes from this word planetas in the Bible? Look what it says. A masculine noun derived from 4105 means to wander. Properly, a wandering star. So in the Bible, in the book of Jude, when you read about the planetas, the planets are wandering stars. Doesn't that sound like a planet today? When you talk about how the planets go on a different orbit than the rest of the stars in the sky, that would be a wandering star. But look what it says in regards to its figurative use. A false teacher operating without a moral compass and exploiting other aimless people. What? How does a wandering star, how does a planet exploit people? It says, example, prompting them to also stray from God's circle of safety, sound doctrine. So are you saying that Jupiter, Mars, Saturn, the wandering stars, the planets, these lead people away from God? Absolutely. And you'll find that most nations, actually, all that I can find, when you take a look at most nations, they're either worshiping the stars or they're worshiping the ground. So either spirits from Sheol or they're worshiping stars in the sky. In this case, what we see Israel doing in the wilderness, they're worshiping stars in the sky, and they're called false teachers. This is what was represented by this golden calf, the heavenly host. That's why it used the word gods. And the Egyptians, you have to remember, the Egyptians were sons of Ham. They were called Mizraim in the Bible. Mizraim, or one of the sons of Ham, who else was the son of Ham? Well, Canaan, the Canaanites. Canaan was the cursed child. And here we can see the Hamites. They're all brothers. They're worshiping what? Well, they're worshiping the heavenly host. So you can see this curse. They don't know God. Acts 7:41 to 43. At that time they made a calf and offered a sacrifice to the idol, rejoicing in the works of their hands. But God turned away from them and gave them over to the worship of the host of heaven. Did you bring me sacrifices and offer me and offerings 40 years in the wilderness, O house of Israel? You have taken along the tabernacle of Molech and the star of your god, Raphan, the idols you made to worship. So in case we had any doubt that this had to do with the worship of stars or the worship of planets, notice here it says in the second part of verse 43, the star of your god, Raphan. You can tell it has to do with the sky. So you have taken along the tabernacle of Molech and the star of your god, Raphan, the idols you made to worship. Therefore, I will send you into exile before Babylon. So here's the question. Who's Molech? I know a lot of Christians know who Molech is because they've seen the idol before. But let's get way more into the granular details and really figure out who Molech is, because it's an important understanding to figure out the golden calf and Christmas. Molech, 3434, definition, Molech, the god of the Ammonites, of Hebrew origin, Molech. Okay, so we can tell that the Molech that's being talked about in the New Testament in the book of Acts is the same Molech of the Old Testament. Now, what were the people doing with this god of the Old Testament, this false god Molech? We can see it was a heathen god to whom the Israelites sacrificed their children. So when I look up the word Molech spelled M-O-L-E-K, which is pointing back to the Old Testament, which is what Acts was referring to, we can see that this was a pagan god. This was a god that the people who didn't know the God of Israel would actually kill their children for. Leviticus 18:21 shows this. You must not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Molech, for you must not profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. So this golden calf has an association to the god Molech, and Molech was this false deity that people were actually sacrificing their children for. So think about it. You're trying to celebrate Christmas here, and you're seeing a theme of child sacrifice already. That's disturbing. Here's some imagery, and you can see what they would do is they'd make this big cast metal idol. So the same way they made this cast metal idol of this golden calf, here you have Molech. Now, is Molech the golden calf? No, they're different. I'm going to show you how they're different. Now, if we look at this golden calf, or sorry, this idol of Molech, if you look at the first picture on the left, you can see that this thing was a big metal idol that was basically an oven. So what they would do is they would light a fire inside of the oven, and then they would take the baby, place it into the hands of the idol. And what do you think would happen to the child? It would cook like it was on an oven. And if you look at the second picture, this is Israel doing it. And again, you can see this flame that's behind the idol. So they're heating up the idol from the backside, putting the baby into the idol's hands, and then literally frying this child alive. And notice they have trumpets in their hands. What they would do is they would do this in areas that were secluded. They'd go into the woods. They'd go into the groves, as the Bible said. That's why you have such a symbol of nature worship with trees during Christmas time. It was done in the groves. They would then blow on trumpets and beat on drums. And the reason they would do this is because the drums and the trumpets would basically silence the sounds of the child screaming. Amos 5:25-27. Did you bring me sacrifices and offerings for 40 years in the wilderness, O house of Israel? You have taken along Succoth, your king, and Kaiwan, your star god, the idols you made for yourself. Now check this out. We're not reading from the book of Acts anymore. This is from the book of Amos. So the book of Amos and the book of Acts, it's almost like you're reading the exact same verse, but the words are slightly different. We don't see this word Remphan. We see this word Kion, and then we see this word Succoth instead of this word Molech. So some of the words look slightly changed, but you can tell it's the exact same thing. Compare them. Amos 5:25-27. Did you bring me sacrifices and offerings 40 years in the wilderness, O house of Israel? You have taken along Succoth, your king, and Kaiwan, your star god, the idols made for yourselves. Take a look at Acts 7:43. You have taken along the tabernacle of Molech and the star of your god Raphan, the idols you made to worship. Therefore, I will send you into exile beyond Babylon. It's the same event. So Molech here is now the word Succoth, and then we have Kaiwan, which is the word Remphan. Take a look at this translation. This is Amos 5:26 in the KJV. But ye have borne the tabernacle of your Molech, and Chayun, now we have another word, your images, the star of your God, which ye made unto yourselves. So we've got Molech, we've got Succoth, we've got Chayun, we've got Remphan. So Remphan and Chayun are associated to the star. Kaiwan and Succoth are associated to Molech. Or my apologies, Molech and Succoth are associated to each other, and Chayun, Remphan, and Kaiwan are associated to each other. Let's look in the Jewish Encyclopedia under the word Chayun. A word occurring in connection with Succoth in Amos 5:26. Scholars have long been puzzled to know whether in this passage they are talking about common nouns or proper names. Succoth is probably the Assyrian Sukkot, an epithet of Ninib and Anu. Ninib was identified with Saturn, the Assyrian name of which was Kaiman or Kaiwan. So now we can see that this planet Saturn, remember we're talking about planetas. We're talking about the heavenly host. We're talking about wandering stars. Now we're starting to get an idea what's going on with this golden calf. It has something to do with the planet Saturn. And if you're familiar with the Hebrew holidays, you'll know that there's a holiday called Sukkot. And here this word Sukkot or Sukkot, it looks extremely close to the Jewish word Sukkot. So it looks like Satan has his own celebration of people going into tents versus what was prescribed in the Bible. If we look in the Bible, this is BibleStudyTools.com. If we look in BibleStudyTools.com at the word Remphon in Amos 5:26, the Hebrew Chayun, is rendered by the Greek Septuagint Raphon, and this name is adopted by Luke in his narrative of the Acts. These names represent the star god Saturn or Moloch. So now we know who this god Moloch is. Moloch is associated to the planet Saturn. Now it's starting to make sense why you're starting to see this idea of the heavenly host. And this word Raphon or Remphon, we're getting this from the Greek Septuagint. So the reason why you're seeing different translations have to do with either how different cultures would spell this god's name, or reading from the Masoretic texts or the Greek Septuagint. Their idol was related to the planet Saturn. Now the golden calf wasn't Saturn. We're going to get to that. But the idol was related to the planet Saturn. So we were looking at Saturn, this word Remphon, and Remphon we were told in two separate sources, a Jewish source and Bible tools, studytools.org. Remphon is Saturn. So the star of Raphon is the star of Saturn. And if you look on the right-hand side, you can see a 6-pointed star, and then in the center, the planet Saturn. But if you look at the top peak, look on the top peak of the planet Saturn, or the top peak of the star. You'll notice that there's this weird symbol in there. We're going to take a look at that in just a second. If you look at the bottom, you'll see Roman numerals, X and V. X is 10, V is 5. 10 and 5 give you 15. In numerology, they would reduce that. 1 and 5 give you 6. Upper left-hand corner, that is the planetary symbol for, the planetary sign for Saturn. So each one of the planets had a planetary sign. They had a planetary seal. The seal is actually the one at the top, which we'll talk about in a second. And so you can suspect, I don't know these other three, but these other three must also be different symbols for Saturn. So according to NASA, there's a hexagon on top of Saturn. It says Saturn's hexagon is a persistent, approximately hexagon cloud pattern around the North Pole of the planet Saturn. Notice how it says the North Pole. When we talk about Christmas, who do you think about when you think of the North Pole? And if you think of the word Santa, Santa is very likely an anagram for Satan. So we see on Saturn's North Pole, there's a hexagon. The sides of the hexagon are 14,500 kilometers long, which is about 2,000 kilometers longer than the diameter of the Earth. Sure. If you take a look, though, a hexagon is actually a 6-pointed star. What I did was I took this 6-pointed star that people have falsely attributed to David, and I stuck it over top of Saturn's hexagon. And you can see either a hexagon, a 6-pointed star, or another object, a cube, because a cube has 6 points. 7 if you count the center. LearnReligions.com. Planetary seals in the Western occult tradition. I'm only interested in one, though. It says, in the Western occult tradition, each planet can be represented by a seal or a diagram. The seal is based on the planet's magic square. The seal theoretically touching every number within the square, although in practice, this is not always the case. So we're going to take a look at the planet Saturn's seal, and we're going to take a look at the planet Saturn's magic square. The magic square is how you get the planetary seal. And you're going to see how this all connects together. This is the planetary seal of Saturn on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, this is the square of Saturn. So if you'll notice, it's the numbers 1 to 9 mapped out in a square that looks like tic-tac-toe. So if you look, 1 and then 2 is up in the right-hand corner, 3 is off to the side. It says the seal of Saturn follows the convention of overlapping every number of the magic square of Saturn in a distinctly orderly fashion. The upward pointing triangle includes the numbers 1, 2, and 3. The diagonal line touches 4, 5, and 6. The bottom pointing triangle includes 7, 8, and 9. So when you look at that 6-pointed star, it's really just a triangle upwards and a triangle downwards. But let's check this out. If we look at the horizontal, so let's start at the number 1. If we go from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, in the order that they are inside the square, you make the planetary seal of Saturn by completing this magic square and connecting the points in order. But here's the interesting part. When you add together the horizontals, the verticals, or the diagonals of the planetary seal of Saturn, you will get the number 15, which reduces to the number 6, because 15, 1, and 5 is 6. So the Saturn square is the 6, 6, 6 square. Let's try it out. Let's start with the number 4. 4 plus 3 gives us 7. 7 plus 8 gives us 15. 1 and 5 gives you 6. Let's try another angle. Let's try diagonal. Let's do 6 and 5. Bottom right-hand corner. 6 and then 5 in the middle. That gives you 11. Plus 4 gives you 15. That's a 6. Or let's try a vertical. 9 and 5 gives you 14. Plus 1 gives you 15, which is 6. Regardless of which direction, horizontal, vertical, or diagonal you go, you will always get the number 15 from the square. So the seal of Saturn, the planetary seal of Saturn, was associated to the number 6. And in the Bible, we know there's a mark of the beast, the number 666. So let's ask the question of who is Saturn in the Bible? Saturn's a planet, sure. And we can see that people were worshiping the heavenly host. And the heavenly host were angels or stars. The Greeks used the word planetas. What star is Saturn in the Bible? Or at least, how is Saturn referenced in the Bible? Because the name Saturn isn't in the Bible, at least not written like that. Leviticus 16, 1-5, the Day of Atonement. Now the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of 2 of Aaron's sons when they approached the presence of the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, tell your brother Aaron not to enter freely into the most holy place behind the veil in the front of the mercy seat on the ark, or else he will die, because I appear in the cloud above the mercy seat. This is how Aaron is to enter the holy place. Look at this. With a young bull for a sin offering. We're going to come back to that in a bit, but remember this idea of a young bull offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He is to wear the sacred linen tunic with the linen undergarments. He must tie a linen sash around him and put on the linen turban. These are holy garments, and he must bathe himself with water before he wears them. And he shall take from the congregation of Israel 2 male goats for a sin offering, and 1 ram for a burnt offering. So the Day of Atonement. Look what it says in Leviticus 16, 6 and 9. Aaron is to present the bull for his sin offering, that's the high priest, and make an atonement for himself and his household. So let me just explain what's going on here for those of you who don't know what the Day of Atonement's about. One day out of the year, the high priest would do a sacrifice on behalf of everyone in Israel in the event that someone didn't come forward, like a child, and confess their sins. Imagine that your child committed a sin. The father had to come down with an animal to sacrifice. Well, what if the child just did that a week ago and the father was living far away from the temple? The father would have to come down again with another animal, which isn't cheap, with the child, and the child would have to place its hands on top of the animal as the animal was killed. You can imagine that if children did this often, they sinned often, they probably wouldn't want to tell their father, because they would have to go down again to the temple with the animal, place their hands, and transfer the sin from themselves to the animal. Because the Father told us sin leads to death, meaning that if you break the law of God, someone or something has to die. And this is what the animal sacrifice was about. After Aaron cast lots for the goats, one for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat. And I highlighted the word scapegoat because I'm going to show you what that word is. He shall present the goat chosen by lot for the Lord and sacrifice it as a sin offering. But the goat chosen as a lot as the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement by sending it into the wilderness as the scapegoat. So once a year, there was a sacrifice done on behalf of all of Israel. And you can see there were these 2 goats. One goat is for the Lord, and the other goat is being cast into the wilderness. What they would typically do is they would take this other goat, they would tie a woolen scarlet string around the goat, and they would send that goat off of a cliff. So someone outside of the camp would actually lead this goat outside of Israel or outside of the camp into the wilderness and eventually off of a cliff. This was called the scapegoat. This word scapegoat, if you actually take a look at the word behind it, the word is Azazel. It's 5799 in the Hebrew, and it means entire removal. In Matthew 25:31, it says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, so when Christ returns, and all the angels are with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people from one another. So see, not everyone's going to heaven here. We're having a separation. As a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. So Christ is the good shepherd. He's going to separate all of the sheep, all of his children, all of the ones who followed him from the goats, those who did not. He will place the sheep on his right, and the goats on his left. So on the right-hand side of Christ, the good shepherd will have all the sheep. On the left-hand side of Christ, we'll have all the goats. There's going to be a separation of everyone in the world. It's like, well, what if people have already died? The Bible has a solution for that. The people who are already dead, they will be resurrected. They will be resurrected, and they will either be on one side or the other. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. So those on the right of Christ, the sheep, they're going to inherit the kingdom. What about those on the left? They will not inherit the kingdom. You can see here there's a discrepancy. There are all the nations of the world gathered. That's including the Israelites. But only those nations, or only those people and those of Israel, at least those who accepted Christ and walked in his character, they'll be on the right. And the kingdom was prepared from the beginning of the world for them. Matthew 25:41. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. So what's the curse? The curse of death. Remember, those who overcome sin, those who emulate Christ, those who keep the law and emulate Christ and have salvation, they are going to be prepared for heaven, whereas the others are going to be prepared for the eternal fire with the devil and his angels. Now notice here that we can see that when we talk about the goats, there's an association to the devil and angels. Have a look at this image. We can see here, it looks like there's a goat's head, and there's a bunch of names on the left-hand side around the goat's head. We've got Shamash in the top left kind of corner by the one horn. Ashtaroth, these are both names in the Bible. Belial, here's another name from the Bible. Astarte, another name from the Bible. Azazel, that's the one we just read from Leviticus. Baphomet, that's the god of the Knights Templar. Asmodeus, that's another name that comes up in the occult, but I don't believe it's in the Bible, unless it's a certain translation I'm not sure of. Beelzebub, we see that name in the New Testament. As a matter of fact, the Pharisees accused Christ of removing demons by the work of Beelzebub. Well, now you can see what it is. It's Azazel, it's the Baphomet, it's the goat god. And notice the upside down cross on his head. I guess there'd be an association to the Antichrist, because he's obviously against the work that happened on the cross. If we look on the right-hand side, we can see a 6-pointed star, and we can see the goat's ears, goat's horns make up 4 points, the chinny chin chin makes up the bottom, and then on the top, we can see a candle, a flame, a torch. There's your 6 points on your Baphomet head. So we can tell that this 6-pointed star is clearly related to the Baphomet, because on top of the Baphomet's head, what do we see? That same fire, that middle horn like a unicorn, except it's got fire coming out of it. Starts to make you wonder what the unicorn's about. So we have a goat with a central horn, and the central horn has fire in the middle, just like the 6-pointed star, which has something to do with Saturn, Molech, Remphan. The planetary seal of Saturn is the 6-pointed star. Take a look. We already saw what the planetary seal is. Remember, it has the number 666 encoded in it. All you had to do was draw the numbers 1 to 9 in the square of Saturn, connect the dots, and then you get the sigil. But if you turn it a little bit so it's more upright, and you remove that center line, look what happens when you draw a line on the top and a line on the bottom. It is the 6-pointed star. So the seal of Saturn is the star of Remphan. They're the same thing. They're just drawn differently. So that means that Azazel from the book of Leviticus, he is Saturn. So Saturn will be the name that the Romans would use because the Romans named that star Saturn. However, in the Bible, there's an association to Azazel. So Azazel, he's the evil one. When you say the Lord's Prayer, the last thing you say is, protect me from the evil ones. The evil ones. Well, here's the evil one. This is Azazel. And then who do you think his followers are? His goats. Notice how all these celebrities and famous people keep calling themselves the goats? What side do you think they'll be on? The left side or the right side when Christ returns? So Azazel is the evil one. He's the Baphomet. He's the devil. He's Saturn. And Saturn is Satan. As a matter of fact, if you research some of Saturn's names written in the ancient world, you'll find that the word Saturn can also be shifted to make the word Satan, one of his older names. Let's look at the book of Enoch, chapter 10. Then said the Most High and the Holy and Great One spake, and sent Uriel, the son of Lamech, and said to him, Go to Noah, and tell him in my name, hide thyself, and reveal to him the end is approaching. The whole earth will be destroyed, and a deluge is about to come. That's a flood. Upon the whole earth, and will destroy all that is on it. And now instruct him that he may escape, and his seed may be preserved for all generations of the world. And again, the Lord said to Raphael, Bind Azazel, hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudael, and cast him therein, and place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, and let him abide there forever, and cover his face that he may not see the light. So Azazel was put in the ground. And you can see that there's a lot of people in the ancient world that worship the dead. They had a god of the dead. As a matter of fact, in Egypt, since we've been looking a lot about Egypt, Osiris was the god of the underworld. And on the day of great judgment, he shall be cast into the fire. So Azazel's been bound hand and foot and thrown into the ground, but on the great day of judgment, he will then be cast into the fire. It goes on and says, and heal the earth which the angels have corrupted, and proclaim the healing of the earth. Remember, we were reading about the idea that your stubborn heart and your non-repentance allows you not to be healed. Why are you sick in the first place? It tells you right here. And heal the earth which the angels have corrupted. You're not following the ways of God. You're following the ways of angels that rebelled, and you're just too stubborn. And proclaim the healing of the earth, that they may heal the plague, and that all the children of men may not perish through the secret things that the watchers have disclosed and taught their sons. Who are the watchers? The angels. And the whole earth has been corrupted. Through the works that were taught by Azazel, ascribed to him all sin. So Azazel, this goat god, this sacrifice that we would see on the day of Leviticus, that was a goat walking off of a cliff with a scarlet thread. For those of you who know anything about the Kabbalah, you'll know that all the practitioners of the Kabbalah often wear a red scarlet thread. Take a guess who the goats are. So Azazel, to him was ascribed all sin. And he would obviously be who? Well, Azazel must be Satan. Revelation 20 and 10. And the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur. Isn't that what we just read in the book of Enoch was supposed to happen to Azazel? So who's the devil? Who's Satan? Azazel. Into which the beast and the false prophet have already been thrown. There they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So if we're looking at Azazel, we know that Azazel is Saturn. I guess it's important that we understand Saturnalia. Saturnalia, the most popular of Roman festivals, dedicated to the god Saturn. The festival's influence continued to be felt throughout the Western world, Encyclopedia Britannica. Now remember, Christmas is not Saturn, or Christmas is not Saturn is not the golden calf, is what I meant to say. Saturn is not the golden calf, but we're going to find out very shortly who the golden calf is, because there's an association to Saturn. If we look at the time that Saturnalia was celebrated, originally celebrated on December the 17th, Saturnalia was extended first to 3 days and then eventually to 7 days. If we look at December the 17th and then add 7 days, where are we going to leave at? 24th, Christmas Eve. The date has been connected with the winter sowing season, which in modern Italy varies from October to January. Remarkably, the Greek Chronia, it was the liveliest festival of the year. So Saturnalia, also known as Chronia to the Greeks, was the liveliest festival of the year. What do you think in the Western world today the liveliest festival of the year is? What's the festival, if you miss out on it, you feel really upset? You feel like you're missing out. Your relatives are doing something without you. Would that not be Christmas? Look at the dates. 7 days from December the 17th to the 24th. You cannot deny there is a connection to Saturn and Christmas. It's obvious. It says La Fête Saturnalis, and this is a drawing. I think the date says either 335 or 535. Either way, we can see here the people are just kind of drunk, and there's a big feast. And you can tell that it's a feast because in the ancient day, they used to actually kind of lay back when they ate. So military commanders, nobility, when it was time to eat, they would kind of be lounged on a couch laying backwards. It was kind of a symbol of power, or a symbol of nobility. So there was drunkenness, there was a lot of activity, there was gift giving, there was a lot of pieces of Saturnalia that we can still see today in Christmas. During Saturnalia, people would feast in their homes, but the historian Livy notes that by 217 BC, there would also be a huge public feast at the oldest temple in Rome, the Temple of Saturn. So this is after the cross, or sorry, this is before the cross, my apologies, at the Temple of Saturn. Macrobius confirms this and says that the rowdy participants would spill out onto the street with the participants shouting, Io Saturnalia. So today people say Merry Christmas. Back then they said, Io Saturnalia. The ordinarily rigid and conservative social restrictions of the Romans changed. For example, the masters served their slaves during a feast, and the adults would serve children, and the slaves were allowed to gamble. And the aristocracy, he usually wore conservative clothes, dressed in brightly colored fabrics, such as red, purple, and gold. Now, it's interesting because if we take a look at the last book of the Bible, the two colors that stand out to me are the red and the purple, scarlet and purple. The Whore of Babylon wears scarlet and purple. And now we have the symbol of gold. We'll figure out what the symbol of gold is, or the color gold, very shortly. This outfit was called the synthesis, which is meant to be put together. They would put together whatever clothes they wanted. It's kind of like your Christmas sweater. Originally taking place on a single day under the reign of Emperor Augustus, the event was extended to multiple days. By the time of Emperor Caligula ruled, Saturnalia lasted between 5 and 7 days, with the culmination often falling on December the 25th, around the time of the winter solstice. You see, today we say the winter solstice is December the 21st. I've done some research and I found that they used to think the winter solstice was actually December the 25th, and then they moved it. So to them, they really were celebrating the winter solstice. December the 25th had added significance for the Romans, as it was the birthday of the sun god, Sol Invictus, the unconquerable sun. Now, I've spoken to someone from the University of Alberta who's done some research on this, and he disagrees, and he has a pretty convincing argument. I don't think Sol Invictus was necessarily celebrated on December the 25th, but there were other sun gods, like Sol Invictus, that were celebrated on the 25th. The reason why they believe this is because there was a calendar found, and I believe the year was 394. And on that calendar, they saw the word Invictus showing up, and that's why they assumed that it was the birth date of Invictus. As late as the 8th century, church authorities complained that even people in Rome were still celebrating the old pagan customs associated with Saturnalia and other winter holidays. So the church itself was still saying that people were celebrating Saturnalia, masquerading it in Rome. So let's take a look at this Baphomet again, which we know as Azazel or Belial or whatever other name this deity operates under. Because remember, if you look, you can see it's both male and female. When we looked at the different names for Baphomet or for Azazel, we saw the name Astarte, and Astarte is definitely a female name. If you take a look at the top of the Baphomet's head, where that unicorn horn is, that's the pupil of the eye. If you look at the outside, you can see that's the outside part of the eye. So this is the all-seeing eye that we can see on the American money. And you'll notice behind the all-seeing eye, which is on what would be called a cornerstone, this would be a benben stone. The benben stone is the top stone, the capstone of the pyramid. This is the cornerstone. You can see behind it rays like the sun. What Satan is doing is Satan wants to replace the chief cornerstone with his own. If you're starting to figure out what Christmas is about now, it's not worshiping Satan per se. It still is, because Satan means the adversary. It's more specific. If you really want to know what Christmas is about worshiping Satan's son. There was no Christ born on December the 25th. This golden calf symbol is Satan's son. Ephesians 2:19 and 22. Now, therefore, you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone. The American $1 bill shows you a counterfeit cornerstone, and the Bible tells you there were builders that rejected the chief cornerstone. As a matter of fact, in Freemasonry, once you become a master mason, there's a book called The Builders, which you're usually given. So here we can see the builders that rejected the chief cornerstone. There's a link to Freemasonry. So one of the groups that would still worship the golden calf today, take a guess. But guess who else is worshiping the golden calf? Most of the Gentile world. It goes on and says, in whom the whole building, being fitted together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you are also being built together for a dwelling place of God in the Spirit. When you practice the holiday of Sukkot, you make a tent. You go inside of the tent. And here we have the Holy Spirit dwelling inside of the temple of God. In other words, God, Christ and the Father, they dwell inside of you. You notice how in the Bible it talks about we are in him, we are in Christ, and Christ is in the Father. You see this language that keeps talking about being within. Well, Sukkot was being inside of a tent, and the tent itself, you can look at like the body. And so what we see is we see this idea that we, the temple of God, have the Spirit of God inside of us. Well, did you notice when we were looking at the book of Amos and the book of Acts, it talked about the tabernacle of Molech, the tent of Moloch, and they used the word Succoth. Succoth sounds like Sukkot. So you can see there's either a spirit of Christ and his Father in you, the Holy Spirit, or there's the spirit of the adversary, the mystery of iniquity, the mystery of lawlessness. Does this remind you of 2 Thessalonians 2? The Father sent his son Jesus to be an example for us. However, Satan did the same. And most people are following Satan's son. They're not evil. Satan's son isn't evil per se. He's the lesser of the two evils. You see, Satan, the adversary, would be evil, but his son looks like he is righteous. His son is associated to the false Christ, and we've done studies on this. So this golden calf is also associated to the false Christ. When you take a look at this eye in the pyramid, or this eye inside of the capstone, the benben stone, the not so chief cornerstone, you can tell that this is the eye of Horus. There's a left eye and there's a right eye. Well, we can see which eye this is. If we look at this eye, it says, related to the moon, protective powers come from deflecting malevolent forces. So if we're looking at one eye, it's the eye of Horus. What's the other eye, though? The other eye is the eye of Ra. So the right eye was associated to the Ra. That was the sun. The left eye was associated to Horus. That's the moon. So depending on what we're looking at here, we're either looking at the eye of Horus or we're looking at the eye of Ra. Remember that when we looked at the three cities that were built by the Israelites, Ramses, Ra, that was one of the cities. We also had Heliopolis. Those big pillars, those pillars were associated to the phallic symbol, and they had to do with Ra. The golden calf that you see in the book of Exodus, the people were worshiping Satan's son, but it's not the son S-O-N, it's a golden calf, and gold is associated to the alchemical metal of, gold is associated to the sun because it's the alchemical metal associated to the sun. For example, Saturn is associated to the alchemical metal of lead. Each planet had a metallic association, and each planet had a seal and a couple other properties. But gold was always associated to the sun. And so we're looking at Satan's SUN. And that makes sense because they thought that December the 25th was the winter solstice. If we take a look, Satan's son, the golden calf, or Horus, the Egyptian god. At Memphis, the holy bull Apis was linked with Osiris, becoming Osiris Apis. So if you study Egyptian mythology, you'll find there was an Apis the bull, a bull of heaven, which eventually became the name of the Hellenistic god Serapis. And Serapis, many pagans have tried to overlap Christ with Serapis. Greco-Roman authors connected Osiris with the god Dionysus. Dionysus is yet another god that they've connected to Christmas. Osiris was also identified with Soker, an ancient Memphite god of the dead. So we have the god of life versus the god of the dead. You're starting to wonder, or at least I was starting to wonder, where do you think the word BS came from? I won't say it, but bull, you can see now, they're tricking you. It's deceptive. However, we have to look at the details. This is not a golden bull. This is a golden calf. So if Osiris is the bull, let's try to figure this out and reason our way through it. Ezekiel 28 and 13 to 15. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every kind of precious stone adorned you. Ruby, topaz, and diamond, beryl, onyx, and jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and emerald. Your mountings and settings were crafted in gold, prepared on the day of your creation. So if they were in Eden, who was it? Or who this is in Eden? It's either Adam, Eve, Cain and Abel came after the garden, or it's the serpent. It goes on in verse 14. You were anointed as a guardian cherub, for I have ordained you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked among the fiery stones. From the day you were created, you were blameless in your ways until wickedness was found in you. So this is the serpent from the Garden of Eden. And we can see the serpent of the Garden of Eden is a cherub. He was a guardian cherub. Look at Ezekiel 10 and 14. Each of the cherubim, right? So cherub is singular, cherubim is plural. Each of the cherubim, which is what we know Satan, the serpent, was, had 4 faces. The first face was that of a cherub. Well, I don't know what a cherub looks like. The second, that of a man. The third, that of a lion. And the fourth, that of an eagle. If I look at a different translation, I can find out what the face of a cherub looks like. Oh, I'm missing it. My apologies. I'll just have to tell you. In the New Living Translation, take a look at Ezekiel 10 and 14. And you'll find that in Ezekiel 10 and 14, the first face was that of an ox. So a cherub looks like an ox. So here's the question. If Osiris was associated to a bull, what's the difference between an ox and a bull? Ask the difference, bull versus an ox. A bull, an adult male of domesticated cattle or oxen. Ox, an adult castrated male of cattle. So bull and ox are both cattle. However, an ox is castrated, a bull is not. The ox is castrated. That's the difference. So when we look at mythology, we find that Osiris was also castrated. In the beginning, Osiris, he had a phallus, but the story of Osiris was that Set had castrated him. If we look here, phallus, Wikipedia, the phallus played a role in the cult of Osiris in the ancient Egyptian religion. When Osiris's body was cut in 14 pieces, Set scattered them all over Egypt. And then in the second piece here, we can see Isis, the wife of Osiris, recovered all the parts of Osiris's body except the phallus. So then it looks like Osiris in the early stages could have been called a bull, but Osiris later in his life, when he lost his phallus, he would be an ox because the ox is castrated. So when you look at these different mythologies of Osiris, you can see Osiris laying dead, and often you can see him with an erect phallus. And this bird, which we've researched, we've seen there's connections to his wife, his consort, and under different names than Isis. But you'll see that Isis as well has these bird wings on her. You can see in the hand is the Egyptian Ankh. And the Egyptian Ankh, from my research, points to a couple of things, but I'll give you two. One symbol is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which the pagans call the tree of life, or the Jews today call the Kabbalah. And then the other symbol it represents is the mushroom, the Amadina muscaria mushroom. In Egypt, there was a mushroom cult. In parts of Asia, there was also a mushroom cult. So for example, the cult of Cybele and lots of stuff that was going on in a place called Phrygia. And Phrygia you can see in the Bible. The 7 churches mentioned in Revelation, you'll see them showing up in this area. Well, the mushroom cults were very prominent in those areas. And we can also see when we look in the New Testament that there was another Christ, a false Christ, coming from another gospel. And we could see that when Paul was writing his epistles, writing his letters are being written to these churches in areas very close to where this mushroom cult was being practiced, which goes all the way back to Egypt. And we can see here this phallic symbol of today shows up in front of many parliament buildings. It's now a standing stone. It's an obelisk. And if you research these 3 cities that were built in the book of Exodus, the 3rd city, which doesn't show up in the Masoretic text, but in the Greek Septuagint, the city of On, it's called Pillar City. And it was the place where we found the first pillar. And this pillar, or this obelisk, was associated to the Egyptian god Ra. And if you understand some of the Egyptian mythology, when the sun would rise, that was Horus. When the sun would reach 12 o'clock, it's zenith. That was the Egyptian god Ra, which is where these pillars were coming from. When the sun would set, that was sunset, or the Egyptian god Set, the one who was said to remove the phallus. And then the final one was Osiris, the god of the underworld. Obviously the one who had been castrated, the god of the dead. So common sense would be this. If the father, Osiris, was a bull, and then the bull became an ox because it was castrated, likely as it entered the underworld, it looks like what happened was we go from Horizon to 12 o'clock Ra, to Set castrating, and then to Osiris, the god of the dead. We're watching a loop of basically the father and son being joined together. If you've ever heard of the term abinity, like the Trinity, but with 2, this is the association of Horus and Osiris. There's a connection between the 2. The father and the son were connected in the Egyptian mythologies. Because if we're talking about phases of the sun, we've got one sun and several phases, 4 phases, what we described. So the father's the bull gets castrated and goes to the underworld. Now he's the ox. And if you take a look here, we can see Apis, the bull in Egypt, was associated with the god Osiris, which means his son Horus will be the bull calf. So the golden calf, remember it's cattle, it's a bull calf. It's a golden bull calf. So when we look back and we see in Exodus that they are worshiping a golden calf, to be very specific, yes, they are worshiping Satan, but they are worshiping Satan's son. They are worshiping the bull calf. And the bull calf actually takes us all the way to Christmas, because Christmas is connected to Saturn. Saturn, we can connect to these Egyptian deities, but of course, it's the child we're celebrating. We also call this Yule's Day and Yuletide, like the Yule log. And Yule or Jewel, Yule is something that came from both the Norse and from Babylon. And Yule in Babylon means little child's day. Which little child are we talking about? Is it the little child Jesus, or is it the little child Horus? And if it's the little child Horus, the bull calf, that means that we're worshiping the sun. Horus, mythencyclopedia.com, Horus Myth Encyclopedia. He was originally portrayed as a hawk or a falcon and worshipped as a sun god. So this is the child of Osiris. We have a sun god and multiple symbols to describe him. So when you look at the zodiac, when you look at the 12 houses on the astrological wheel, remember they worship the host of heaven. Horus is a solar deity. the sun sits in the middle of the zodiac, and it goes through all the astrological houses. And then on a certain day of the year, the sun dies and resurrects, and it dies and resurrects on the cross. It sounds very similar to the sun S-O-N, which is Jesus Christ, but this is the sun S-U-N, and it's not dying on the cross at Calvary. It's dying on the winter solstice and summer solstice and equinox, or sorry, in the spring equinox and the fall equinox. It's dying on that cross. So what we're really looking at when we're looking at the story of Horus and Osiris is we're looking at the motions of the sun. We're looking at a story that's talking about the zodiac, which today is being blurred with the Christian Bible. And the only reason it's able to be blurred with the Christian Bible is because people aren't necessarily reading it. And they just assume that this is just another story from the East. And now Christ, the S-O-N, is being blurred with the sun S-U-N. Jesus is not Horus. Every December the 21st, the sun would die at the winter solstice. The sun would lay dead on the horizon for 3 days. And then on that third day, that sun would resurrect and be born again on December the 25th. Christmas is the worship of Satan's son, S-U-N. It's the worship of Horus. It's the worship of the sun dying on the solstice and equinox cross. This is not our God. And you can see here, this is the solar cross. It's how the Pope signs his name. And the Vatican knows very well why they put a Christmas tree up. The Christmas tree is put right beside the obelisk. And this symbol shows up a lot in Rome. It's the solar cross. It's the sun sitting crucified on the equinox and solstices. And if you look at what time of year is Christmas? Well, it's the winter solstice, which is when? Capricorn the goat, for any of you who are born in Capricorn. And Christ said, I will separate the sheep from the goats. Are you going to do what God says, or are you going to be stubborn? Are you going to be a goat? I heard goats are quite stubborn. Here's the sun moving along the equator. Remember, the mother was called Isis. If we look at how the sun moves, there's a couple things we can observe. For one, this makes a dollar sign. Look at it. Tilt your head sideways. You're looking at a dollar sign. When you spell the word Isis, Isis is I-S-I-S. So the mother of Horus was Isis. But normally when you write a dollar sign, and the dollar sign is associated to money, you put an S with 2 vertical lines going through it. I-S-I-S. Do you serve God or do you serve mammon? Do you serve the devil? Do you serve money? What happens at Christmas time? We spend a lot. We put a big hole in our pocket. Can't you see mammon? Can't you see the god of money? So again, the sun moves between the summer solstice, the winter solstice, and then it keeps repeating the cycle with spring and also the fall. So what we're seeing is the sun is moving like a serpent. Did you know that you can find rock busts in Egypt of Osiris, Isis, and Horus, except disguised, not even disguised, they're just serpents. They're just serpents. Now, who is the serpent in the Bible? The devil and Satan. Okay, so whether it's Isis or whether it's Osiris or whether it's Horus, if all 3 of them were depicted as serpents in Egypt, then who do you think you're worshiping? Satan, regardless of which 3 of them it is. And this is where we get the idea of the Trinity. Isis, Horus, and Set. That's the Trinity. There is no Trinity in the Bible. There is Elohim, and Elohim, which is translated as God. If you look at Psalms 82, it's more than a Trinity, as all the heavenly beings made up the Elohim as well. They're mixing Egyptian mythology into Christian worship. If we take a look on the right, we can see here's Horus, here's the sun, or whatever other name of a sun god. We could call him Dionysus, we could call him Bacchus, we could call him any solar deity's name. On the left-hand side, we've got the pagan wheel of the year. The pagan wheel of the year, you can see, is divided into sections. And if we look at the section with December the 21st, the winter solstice, this is called Yule, and Yule is called Little Child's Day. So again, it's Horus that we're celebrating. And then if you take a look in the center, you can see the symbol called the triquetra. And the triquetra was associated to the triple goddess of the moon. So on the right side, we see the sun in the center. On the left side, we see the moon in the center. Why is that? Because before we had geocentrism, and geocentric means earth-centered, which is what the Bible describes. It's the earth, it's the creation, that's the center of everything. And then later, we switched to a sun-centered, and the sun-centered we can see on the right. But you can also see the symbol in the center, this geocentric, this earth-centered. We can either look at this as the sun, S-U-N, of Satan, or if we look at this symbol called the triquetra, it's a symbol that's associated to witchcraft, because the neo-pagan triple goddess, this is a symbol that shows up within witchcraft, like Wiccans. Which brings me to Yule. We look at this wreath. The wreath has the 5-pointed star inside of it. What's the 5-pointed star represent? Well, it's a pentagram. That's right. Well, which star in the sky is that? The star Venus. Because Venus makes a 5-pointed star every 8 years if you were to watch it from the earth. So they actually put the symbol of the devil inside of this wreath. Now, why did they do it? Because if you take a look, you'll notice here's the goat's head. So it's the 5-pointed star flipped upside down. But if you take a look around the wreath, what do you see? A circle with some Hebrew letters. Well, what are those Hebrew letters? What does it spell? It spells Leviathan. What's Leviathan? It's the serpent from the book of Job. It's the serpent associated to the children of pride. Friends, pride is an emotion. The devil tricks you through your emotions. See this thing that most people have on their doors? You have a serpent on your door. It represents Leviathan. That's why you'll see, for example, in places like England, Ireland, they'll put the 5-pointed star inside of it because they know what it means. God called his people to be holy. Excuse my typo. 1 Peter 2:9. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, to proclaim the virtues of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. In other words, you're not blind anymore. You're not walking around the dark, not having a clue what this is about. You either worship God and you do it in full. You can't worship God and the devil simultaneously. You cannot sit at both tables. You pick one. This is the mistake Solomon made as well. With Solomon's 700 wives and 300 concubines, Solomon still worshiped the Lord, but he also served the Baals and the Asherah. We're seeing a connection to Christmas with the Baals and the Asherah. We see solar and lunar symbols. So we know that there's a connection to both Baal and Asherah. So we're doing the exact same thing that was being done by Solomon. And it didn't work out for Solomon. It's not going to work out for you. The word holy in Hebrew is the word kodesh. We're going to take a look at that because God asked us to be a holy nation. We were a chosen people, a priesthood, a holy nation. We're not in darkness. We are in light because God is light. So let's look at this word kodesh. Kodesh means apartness, sacredness. So if you're holy, that means you're separate. You're apart from the world. Remember, the world is worshiping fallen angels. We can tell you exactly when it happened. Deuteronomy 32. The people chose to rebel. God said, fine, you don't want to worship me. I will give you over to these angels. And then Israel was supposed to come and bring everyone back. We're meant to be holy. We're apart from the world. Look at this word sacred in the Wikipedia. The word kodesh is used in the Torah to mean set apartness and distinct. So we are separate, we are set apart, we are distinct from the rest of the world, we are holy, and it is not easy to be holy. When everyone else is not holy, and you decide that you want to be holy, you want to be separate, you feel like an outcast. John 15:19, if you were of the world would still love its own. The world would love its own. But because you are not of the world, why are you not of the world? Because you're holy, you're separate. But I chose you out of the world. Because of this, the world hates you. When you don't do what the Gentiles do, when you don't partake in this worship today of the golden calf, Christmas, Horus. You're separate. The world hates you. They think you're weird. James 4:4. You adulterous people. What is adultery? Is that a commandment? Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? So in other words, you could be popular in the world, but chances are if the world loves you, guess who doesn't? Your God. Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. So if all your friends and all your family all think you're awesome, and lots of people think you're awesome, chances are God doesn't think you're that awesome. Because people typically, when you go against the grain, when you try to set yourself apart, when you try to make yourself holy, they don't take it very well. 1 John 2:15. Do not love the world nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. In other words, if you're partaking in these unholy days, understand God will forgive you. You can repent, but the love of the Father is not in you. Be in the world, not of it. What are we saying? Be holy, be separate, because I can tell you, God does not care if you are popular. He doesn't care if you keep up with the Joneses. As a matter of fact, by not keeping up with the Joneses, you might actually find yourself repenting and finding out what real holiness is. God called us to be holy. How do we do it? We are to follow Christ, the Son, the chief cornerstone. This is not the chief cornerstone in this background picture. This is Horus. This is Satan's son. This is what the world is following. And remember, Satan's son, when they depicted this calf, they said the word gods. They said the word heavenly host. People are worshiping unholy days that came from angels that are rebelling. If you partake with them, you're rebelling too. We're not supposed to worship Horus. God has a son, and Satan is a great counterfeiter. And so how did Satan counterfeit? And since God the Father sent his son down for us to have an example, Satan's son is the example for all the pagans. For all those who don't know God, Satan's son, the golden calf, is the example. So I hope today you got something great out of this lesson, and you can see the connections of the golden calf, Horus, and the connection to Christmas. Because Saturnalia or Saturn, that was the father figure, and it ends right on the day when you would worship the Son. But it's not the Son, S-O-N. It has nothing to do with Jesus. It's the Son, S-U-N. And we can learn from Solomon, and we can learn from those who worship the golden calf. You cannot worship God and the devil. The calf has horns on it, or at least in time, it will have horns on it, just like their father.
For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Brothers and sisters, the sword is coming. If you hear the watchman's call, please repent and seek out Jesus Christ. There is still time. That at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow.